I never imagined the very last thing I'd see in this world would be my own daughter's smile as her husband shoved me toward my grave. But before I go on with this story of blood and betrayal, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop your location in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and honestly, it really does help us keep making more of these stories for you. All right. Now, where were we? My name's Margaret Thompson. At 65, I truly felt I'd earned a little peace. I'd spent 40 grueling years as a head nurse in trauma units, the kind of career where you see the human body at its most fragile and the human spirit at its most desperate. I had stitched up gang members, held the hands of dying grandfathers, and remained the calm center of 1,000 storms. My husband, Arthur, had been my rock, a man who ran a successful architectural firm with a steady hand and a heart of gold. We had built a life on the foundation of hard work and mutual respect. We spent our weekends hiking the back trails of the Rockies, learning the terrain like the back of our hands. Arthur always said that the mountains could either be your sanctuary or your tomb, depending on how much you respected them. I never thought he was being literal. After Arthur passed last year from a sudden pulmonary embolism, the silence in our Denver home was deafening. It was a sprawling mid-century modern gem, filled with the echoes of 40 years of marriage. He had left me the house and a liquid estate worth $5 million. I was lonely, sure, but I was safe, or so I figured. My daughter, Sarah, was our only child. We had given her everything, the best schools, a debt-free college education, and a wedding that cost as much as a small starter home. But Sarah had a restless, hollow quality to her. She never seemed satisfied with the slow climb of a career. She married Michael, a man who spoke in the jargon of venture capital, but had the bank account of a failed gambler. After the funeral, they became my shadow. They were at my door every evening with organic casseroles and forced smiles. They were worried about my grief. They insisted I was withering away in that big house. "You need that fresh mountain air, Mom," Sarah would say, her eyes darting around my living room, lingering on the original oil paintings and the silver service. "A hike, just the three of us, to help you heal. Dad would have wanted it. I should have seen it coming. I should have noticed the way Michael's hands shook when he checked his phone, or how Sarah spoke about future renovations, as if the house were already hers. I caught them once in the kitchen, whispering about liquidity and valuation, but when I walked in, they just offered me a cup of tea. But a mother's heart is a stubborn, foolish organ. It chooses to see love where there is only greed. It builds excuses for the people it brought into the world. The Tuesday they chose was beautiful in that sharp, biting way Colorado Falls can be. The sky was a cruel, brilliant blue, the kind that looks like glass ready to shatter. They drove me to a remote trail in the San Isabel National Forest, far from the tourist-heavy paths of the Front Range. It was a place Arthur and I used to go when we wanted to disappear for a while. "It's a secret spot," Michael said, his voice tight, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "The best view of the ravine." As we hiked, the air grew thin. My lungs, seasoned by years of high-altitude living, handled it better than theirs, but I pretended to be winded to make them feel superior. I wanted them to feel like they were taking care of their aging mother. We reached a jagged outcrop, a limestone tooth jutting out over a 200-foot drop. Below, the ravine was a chaotic tumble of granite and pine, shrouded in the long shadows of the afternoon. "Stand right. There, Margaret," Michael said, pulling out his camera. "Just a bit further back. I want to catch the sun hitting the peaks behind you. It'll be a beautiful memory." I smiled. I actually smiled at him. I felt his hand rest on my shoulder, a heavy, warm weight. I thought it was a sweet gesture, a moment of familial bonding after a year of sorrow. Then, the weight shifted. With a hard, calculated, mean shove, the world tilted. I didn't even scream. The shock was so absolute that it stole the oxygen right out of my lungs. I felt the sickening absence of ground beneath my boots, the rush of wind, and the terrifying blur of grey rock. Time dilated, as it often does in trauma. I remember seeing the individual needles on a pine branch as I zipped past it. By some miracle, or perhaps the intervention of Arthur's ghost, I didn't go all the way to the jagged floor of the ravine. 30 feet down, a scrubby, stubborn ledge, overgrown with gnarled mountain mahogany and packed with ancient pine needles, caught me. The impact was brutal. I felt the distinct, sickening crack snap of 2 ribs on my left side, and a jagged branch sliced a deep furrow across my forehead, sending blood into my eyes. Pain flared, white and blinding, but my nurse brain, that cold, clinical part of me that had survived 40 years of ER shifts, took over instantly. "Don't move," it whispered. "Assess the damage. Stay silent." I lay perfectly still, my face pressed into the dirt and needles. I did a mental inventory. Breathing was shallow but possible. No immediate signs of internal hemorrhaging in the abdomen. Limbs felt responsive. I rolled into the shadows of the overhang, pressing my body against the freezing stone, barely breathing. Up above, the silence was worse than the fall. I expected crying. I expected Sarah to scream my name in a panic. Instead, I heard the crunch of gravel, then Michael's heavy, ragged breathing. "He did it," Sarah whispered. Her voice wasn't trembling with horror. It was flat, metallic, and cold. "Is she gone?" I heard Michael grunt, likely leaning over the edge to peer into the abyss. I can't see her through the brush, but nobody survives that drop, even if she didn't hit the bottom. The shock alone at her age. "We wait 10 minutes, Sarah said, her voice chilling me more than the mountain wind. "Then we call it in as an accident?" She slipped. She was dizzy from the altitude. It was the grief, Michael. Everyone knows she hasn't been the same since Dad died. We'll be the grieving children. The community will rally around us. "Good," Sarah continued, her voice rising with a terrifying lightness. I couldn't take another day of her advice or her judging looks. "Michael, do you know how much debt we owe the casino? If she's not dead, we're dead. The house is ours now. The accounts, the silver, everything." I lay there, blood matting my hair, listening to my only child calculate my worth over my supposed corpse. In that moment, the Margaret Thompson who loved them died. The woman who crawled out of those shadows was someone they didn't know, a survivor forged in the fires of betrayal. Using survival tricks Arthur and I had practiced during our years of backcountry camping, I waited. I waited for an hour. Even after I heard their SUV pull away, I knew they would drive to a spot with better reception before calling the authorities to report the accident. Every movement was an agony. My ribs felt like jagged knives poking at my lungs with every breath. But I climbed. I used the adrenaline and the pure, icy rage to fuel me. It took me 2 hours to navigate the sheer face back to a traversable slope, dragging my body through the brush like a wounded animal. I didn't go to the police. I knew Michael and Sarah. I knew their charm. If I showed up then, battered and confused, they'd claim I'd had a breakdown, that I'd fallen and was hallucinating their conversation. They would have me committed, and then they would have total control. I needed them to think they'd won. To defeat a snake, you have to let it settle into its hole. I flagged down a dusty Ford F-150 3 miles down the road. An old couple from Texas, the Millers, pulled over. I told them I'd been mugged at a trailhead and my phone was stolen. They were sweet, God-fearing folks who saw a bleeding grandmother and didn't ask for a police report when I begged them to just take me to a clinic in Colorado Springs, far from the jurisdiction where my accident would be reported. I told them I had family there who would care for me. I used a fake name at the walk-in clinic, paying the $3,000 bill in cash from the emergency stash I always kept in my hiking pack, an old habit from the trauma unit days. While the local news began reporting on the tragic disappearance and presumed death of local philanthropist Margaret Thompson, I was holed up in a 6 out of 10 motel, taping my own ribs and opening a laptop. I went from victim to strategist in a heartbeat. 40 years in the ER teaches you that panic is a luxury you cannot afford. You stabilize the patient, you stop the bleeding, and then you find the source of the trauma. In this case, the trauma was my own flesh and blood. First, I checked my bank accounts. I saw the activity almost immediately. Sarah was already trying to move funds, using the power of attorney she thought was still valid. What she didn't know was that my gut had flared up a month ago. I'd seen Michael's final notice gambling debts in the trash, and I'd seen the way Sarah looked at my jewelry, not with sentiment, but with an appraisal. 2 weeks before the hike, I had quietly met with my lawyer and changed my will. I'd established a private foundation for the education of trauma nurses. I left Sarah and Michael exactly $0. I had even revoked the power of attorney, but the paperwork hadn't been processed by the banks yet. I called the banks and froze everything, telling them there was suspicious activity and that I was traveling. I hired an investigator named Silas Morrison. He was a retired detective I'd treated years ago after he'd been caught in a crossfire. He was a man who lived in the grey areas of the law and didn't ask questions if the money was green. "I'm dead, Silas," I told him over a burner phone. "I need you to bug my house, every room, and I need a secure line to watch the feeds." Since I was missing and presumed dead, they moved into my home within 48 hours. They didn't even wait for a memorial service. Through the hidden cameras Silas installed, I watched the truth of my life's work. It was a nest of snakes. Michael wasn't just a gambler. He had a mistress in Vegas named Tiffany, whom he was promising a golden life to once the insurance paid out. I watched him on the sofa, my sofa, drinking Arthur's vintage scotch and laughing about how easy it had been. And Sarah, my grieving daughter, had already contacted a secret divorce lawyer. She planned to take the $5 million, pin Michael's debts on him, and ditch him the moment the check cleared. She was searching my closets, throwing my clothes into garbage bags like they were trash. She even took Arthur's watch, the one I'd given him for our 25th anniversary, and put it in her purse, muttering about how much she could get for it at a pawn shop. They didn't love each other, and they certainly never loved me. I was just a barrier to their luxury. I started the mind games on day 5. I had Silas deliver a bouquet of white lilies, my favourite, to the front door. The card simply read, "The view from the ledge was beautiful. See you soon." I watched the camera feed as Sarah read it. She turned a shade of grey I've only seen in a morgue. She screamed for Michael, accused him of being sloppy, of not checking the ledge. They spent 3 hours screaming at each other, their grief replaced by a frantic, jagged paranoia. Michael went back to the cliff that afternoon, but Silas was already there, hidden in the brush, filming him as he frantically searched the ledge for a body that wasn't there. Then I hit their pockets. I had Silas leak anonymous tips to the insurance company and the bank regarding Michael's undisclosed debts and Sarah's pending legal maneuvers. All payouts were frozen, pending an investigative hold. The house became a pressure cooker. Without the immediate influx of cash, Michael's bookies started calling the house. I watched him drink himself into a stupor every night, while Sarah became a shut-in, jumping at every shadow, convinced I was a ghost haunting the hallways. I sent a recording of my own voice to the house's smart home system. In the middle of the night, while they lay in my guest room, I whispered through the speakers, "Is she gone, Sarah? Is she gone?" The mental breakdown was swift. Michael began to believe Sarah was setting him up, that she had moved the body to frame him for the whole thing. Sarah believed Michael was working with me, that I had survived and he was helping me hide. The greed that had united them now tore them apart. When the time was right, when they were broke, and hating one another, I set the trap. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, called them. He told them new evidence regarding my estate, and the circumstances of my disappearance had surfaced and required their immediate presence for a mandatory deposition. They showed up at the law firm looking terrible. They had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Sarah's hair was unwashed, her eyes sunken and dark. Michael's eyes were bloodshot and wild, his suit wrinkled and stained with booze. They sat in the mahogany-lined conference room, smelling of desperation and fear, ready to fight for the scraps of my life. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. "Before we begin," he said, "I believe the principal wishes to make a statement." The door opened, and I walked in. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a person. Sarah didn't scream. She just made a soft, clicking sound in her throat, her eyes widening until the whites showed all the way around. Michael actually fell out of his chair, scrambling backward against the wall like a cornered rat, his mouth agape. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I sat down at the head of the table, placed a thick manila folder in front of me, and spoke in a voice that was soft, low, and cold as the mountain stream. "You thought the fall would kill me?" I said, looking directly into my daughter's eyes. "But you forgot one thing, Sarah. You were raised by a woman who spent 40 years seeing exactly what the human body can take. I know how to fall, and I know how to get back up. But more importantly, I know how to survive people like you." I turned on a digital recorder. I played the audio Silas had captured on the cliff. The wind, whistling, the sound of the shove, and then Sarah's voice. "Is she gone? Good. I couldn't take another day of her." Then I played the footage from the living room. Michael talking to Tiffany, Sarah talking to her divorce lawyer about the inheritance. I watched the realizations sink in. They weren't just caught. They were obliterated. The final blow was the paper. I pushed the updated will and the revoked power of attorney across the table. "Even if I had died that day," I told them, "you wouldn't have seen a single cent. I disinherited you weeks before we ever set foot on that trail. You tried to murder your mother for a prize that didn't exist." The door to the side office opened, and Silas Morrison walked in with 2 uniformed officers. The charges were substantial: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and multiple counts of financial fraud. But the real punishment was the look on their faces, the look of 2 people who had gambled everything and realized they were holding nothing but air. The trial was a circus, but a satisfying one. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the recordings, the debt trails, and my own testimony, they turned on each other like starving dogs. It was a masterclass in cowardice. Sarah's defense was that Michael had coerced her, that she was a victim of his abuse, and she was too afraid to stop him. Michael produced emails and text messages showing that Sarah was the one who had researched the specific trail, picking the spot where accidents are common, and there were no security cameras. They both were convicted. Sarah was sentenced to 15 years. Michael got 12, given his secondary role in the planning. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs on the final day of the trial, Sarah tried to catch my eye. Her lip trembled, a fake tear rolling down her cheek, and she mouthed the word, "Mom." I simply turned my head. I looked at the exit sign, the bright red light of the way out. That word, "Mom," didn't mean a thing to me anymore. It was just a sound used by a predator to lure its prey. She wasn't my daughter. She was a stranger who looked like someone I used to love. I sold the Denver house. It was a beautiful structure, but it was stained by the memory of greed and the echoes of their plotting. I couldn't sit in the living room without hearing Sarah's voice whispering about my jewelry. I moved far away, to a small, sun-drenched villa by the sea. The air is thick and salty here, much easier to breathe than the thin, treacherous air of the mountains. I spend my days now working with a non-profit I funded, helping seniors navigate legal protection against elder abuse and financial exploitation. I teach them to watch for the signs I missed, the sudden interest in their health, the subtle questions about their assets, the fake concern. I spend a lot of time by the water. The ocean doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. It's powerful. It's indifferent. And it's honest. I think about Arthur a lot. I think about what he would say. I think he'd be proud of the way I climbed out of that ravine. I think he'd be heartbroken about Sarah. But he was always a man of justice. Justice isn't about being angry. Anger is a poison that you drink hoping the other person dies. Justice is about fixing the balance. It's about ensuring that the world remains a place where actions have consequences. I'm 65. My ribs have healed, though they ache a bit when the weather turns cold. The scar on my forehead is hidden by my hair, a permanent map of the day I was reborn. I'm alive, and for the first time in my life, I am finally, truly free. I don't owe anyone my love, my money, or my time. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who is standing there with a hand to pull you up, not a hand to push you down. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. Did Margaret go too far? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? I often wonder if I should have just gone to the police immediately, but then I remember the look on Sarah's face in that conference room. The look of a person who finally understood that their mother wasn't a victim, but a survivor. That moment was worth every broken bone. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching. Your support means everything to us as we continue to tell these stories of resilience and justice. Stay safe out there, and remember, always watch your back, even when it's family.